Welcome to Hack Your API First. And in this fifth module, we're going to start looking at API authentication and authorization. Now, we touched on this just briefly in the last module, where we managed to manipulate the response from the API to then perform an activity which we weren't authorized to do. In that case, it was voting twice. So we've just scratched the surface of authorization. Let's now move on and start drilling down quite a bit deeper. Let's go back to a bit of Authentication 101, and I want to talk about website authentication because it's a paradigm that's been around for many years now, and I'll talk about the relevance to mobile API authentication immediately afterwards. So here's our scenario. We have a user who wants to authenticate to a website, so they log in. Pretty straightforward. Inevitably, when they log in, they'll provide a username and a password. Also, nothing new about that. Now, obviously, once the user provides this information to the login page, the website will authenticate them. Let's not worry too much here about how that actually happens, and we'll assume that they get successfully authenticated. In a normal, secure implementation of authentication on the web, the server will then respond with what we call an auth token. Now, I talked about these tokens quite extensively in the Hack Yourself First course, and I've also spoken about them at length in the OWASP Top 10 for .NET Developers course. And they keep coming up because auth tokens are absolutely essential components of a website authentication scheme. Usually, when you log on to a secure website, the auth token will come back to you in the form of a cookie. So what this ultimately means is that there's a piece of data that sits there in the browser, that's the auth token or auth cookie, which is then sent back to the server on every subsequent request to identify the authenticated user. So they might go to a page to order an item, or check out their shopping cart, or do something else that requires them to be authenticated. And of course, when they make this request, that cookie, and remember that's the auth token, is automatically sent. So the website knows who they are. And really what this is doing here is the authorization component. Hey, we already know who you are, but what are you allowed to do? And by taking that auth cookie and being able to identify the user, the application can make some assertions on that. So let's bring this back round to the rich client app and API space. Why is this relevant? Well, there's a couple of things. Firstly, the objectives that I just spoke about in terms of not resending those credentials on every request is equally relevant. We don't want someone logging into a mobile device and then every single time they hit an API, their username and password gets sent. But the other thing is, in this quote-unquote RESTful world, that is the representational state transfer world, that is generally the pattern that most modern-day APIs adhere to, they are meant to be agnostic of session state. So theoretically, and I'm caveating this simply because restfulness does become somewhat of a religious debate, but theoretically, you shouldn't be sending things like cookies on each request. That would usually depend on a prior request having set the cookie and then persisting it through to subsequent requests. I'm going to leave the intro there because throughout this module, we will talk about the alternatives for authenticating, receiving a token, and then authorizing subsequent requests, but I just wanted to set the context of how it's done in the web and what it is that we need to replicate in the mobile world and what some of those challenges might be.